silent while I remember. Colleagues, good morning and welcome to this event that Hlanganisa is hosting. We're excited to welcome all of you. My name is Ndlovu. I am in the programs team at Hlanganisa, and we are so excited. In fact, we started the festivities, well, for some people on Monday. I suppose part of the trip coming to Joburg is the start of the fun, especially for colleagues who haven't been to Johannesburg for a long time. I also get excited every time I get to visit partners in the different areas. So we are really excited that we are hosting the seminar this morning. Let me just do all the formalities, get that out of the way, and then we can start. The bathrooms are for females. As you exit the door, to your left, the female toilets are there. And then the male toilets, as you exit the door, further to your right, you'll find the gents' toilets that side. I'd like to welcome our distinguished guests, all our partners in our room, the friends of Hlanganisa, the chairperson of our board, I just saw it coming in now. And then we also have got a very an interesting group of our foot soldiers. We call them the sisterhood advocates from the different provinces. I was excited to see some of them who are joining us this morning. The event today, we are going to be looking at issues around access to justice. We are going to be having a keynote by Professor Panipijana, and afterwards will be followed by Q&A, and then we're going to have a short break afterwards. Then we'll come back, reconvene, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So that is how the day is going to be up until we break for lunch. So we are really excited about the new lessons that we are going to be getting from Prof. Pijana, but also and the panel members. So yeah, if you don't have a notebook, you can use the program just to take the notes so that then you don't forget what you need to be asking. So we're excited about today. So without any further ado, I'd like to call upon our chief, Ms. Bumi Wendondo, to come and give us a context of why we are here and what we are expecting to achieve.
This is not designed for people my height. Let's see if we can sort it out. And I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to our inaugural Access to Justice seminar. Many of you will know Hlanganisa's journey, but access to justice is one of our important thematic areas. And we've been working in this area for almost 20 years now. And in the last 2 years, as we were developing our new strategy, we had the opportunity to do a bit of formative research to inform the new strategy. And one of the things that came up is how justice is perceived by our communities. Often we talk about justice as if everybody understands justice to mean the same thing. And I think today we want to talk about justice a little bit more broadly than we've always conceptualized it within our program areas. I just want to share with you a story. So there's a young lady who had a relationship, an unfortunate, I think, relationship with a teacher, a school teacher. She was 15 and she fell pregnant. And she lived with her grandmother. And when her grandmother discovered that she was pregnant, of course, in our culture, we will ask what happened, who, why, how, and so it emerged that it was the teacher responsible. Now, the grandmother wanted justice. And in seeking justice, she went to school, she reported, and what happened was the teacher was suspended, and after investigations, he was dismissed, and not only dismissed because she was below age, she was a minor, he was also sent to prison. Now, we had a conversation with this grandmother, and she said, this is what happened, and my granddaughter had to be taken out of school. She is now out of school. I cannot take her back. But not only that, she's got a baby that needs to be taken care of. And the person who is supposed to, in her view anyway, who is supposed to be taking her back to school, the person who impregnated her, does not have the means, has been stripped of the means to take her to school, back to school. But the person who's also supposed to be taking care of this baby can no longer do it, has been disabled and can no longer do it. Now, she said, how is that justice? How is that justice? In fact, you've taken away an opportunity for me to obtain justice. Now, there are many such stories told, and I've no doubt that for many of us in this room, having the teacher suspended, having him tried and go to prison would have been justice, right? That for us would have been justice. So I think as we talk about justice today, I want us to just, suspend, the rigid framework that we often operate in, and just think about what does it mean, to deliver justice for people who live on the margins, like many of our South African people do. We know that there is 300 odd courts, magistrate courts, which is the entry-level court system in South Africa. There's 300 odd courts. And those courts have huge backlogs, some of them going into 3 years. We know that we have police stations in most areas, but we also know that many of those police stations are inaccessible, just geographically. They're quite far from where our people live. Many people have to take a taxi, sometimes two, to get to their nearest police station. So again, as we talk about what does it mean, how does one access justice, we need to be thinking about what is available, and is it really accessible to ordinary people? There is varying statistics about how many people access justice through traditional justice system, through inkosi and the chiefs and all of that. Some people put it as high as 60%. I know that in countries like Botswana, it's as high as 90%. Somebody was telling me Ethiopia, even higher than that. And yet we consider those justice systems informal justice systems, Our mainstream justice system is the one that many of us cannot access for various reasons. Most of them, mostly because of how cumbersome it is, but also because of the cost of legal representation. Many of us cannot afford lawyers. So if 60%, if indeed 60% of our communities are accessing justice through the traditional courts, do we know what's happening in those traditional courts? Do we know how justice is delivered within those traditional courts? Another story I want to share with you. So I come from a village, and we happen to be of royal blood. So if you meet me next, do call me princess. But there's a story that my father, before he died, presided over. This was, again, related to a young lady who, over the Easter holidays, had gone off, had an affair with a local policeman. And she had gone off and disappeared for that whole holiday and came back later. And of course, she also lived with her grandparents. Her grandfather was, livid, and, after asking all the questions, they went to the police station and said, this is where my grandchild was, and I want compensation. Now, she was 16, and he said he wanted compensation. After a very long trial within this traditional justice, this traditional court, this policeman was eventually fined, I think it was 2 cattle. Now, the grandfather, on the day that he was going to receive these cattle, because a city, people sit and then you decide that on this day we're going to pass judgment. So the day he was going to arrive with this, the day he was going to get this cattle, he arrived with somebody who owed cattle. And so they moved from the person who was paying them to whoever he owed the money. And nothing was done for this young girl. But justice had been served in that court, right? Justice had been served in that court because a lot of our courts still work on a very, reparative justice framing. So on that day, the perpetrator had been charged, he had delivered on the charge. But the actual person who had been, the minor who had been abused by not just an ordinary, not just an ordinary adult, yeah, but a police officer, no less. Justice had not been served for that young girl, and yet justice had been served in that courtroom. So I think as we talk about justice, I want us to talk today about what justice means, but also what it means from the perspective of those who use informal justice systems, and question why we call them informal justice systems when more than 60% of our people are still getting justice there. I was speaking the other day to a young man who had a court case and had been appearing in court and had to appear in court, and he said to me, he had defaulted on one of his court appearances, and he said on the day it had rained and the buses that leave his village going to where the court is were unable to travel. So he was just unable to travel. But he had made, it was a non-appearance in court. Now, our court systems don't seem to recognize the context that our people live in. And our people also don't seem to understand our criminal justice system. You speak to a lot of people who ask you, but the neighbor's daughter was raped, we know who the rapist is and is out on bail. And the feeling is that he should not be out on bail because people don't understand what bail is, right? We don't understand how anybody who has done, who has committed such an atrocious crime within our communities is still roaming the streets with us and, evidently still quite a threat to us. And we ask the question, but how come? Yeah? But he's entitled to bail in our justice system. He's out because he's out on bail. And our people don't understand that. So it's all of these things, even as we work within the constraints of the justice system that we have, we need to be thinking about what is the level of rights literacy, what is our people's understanding, and how do they engage with this justice system when they have to. I think in closing, in fact, before I close, I think the other element that we would like to explore today through the panel is also the concept of social justice. We often talk about social justice, and I think it means different things to different people. But in South Africa, we have a history, we have an unfortunate history. And the remnants of that history still live with us today. Our level of awareness of our rights. We talk about having a brilliant constitution, but many of us actually, don't even know what our rights are within that constitution. We talk about having brilliant laws, but the compliance to those laws is very low. And what does that mean? So when we talk about compliance, what does it mean to fail to be, when you have a 90% non-compliance? does that not say something about the laws themselves? You know, is it just a question of people being defiant, or is it also a question of the law being removed from what people understand at community level? We also want to talk about our socio-economic rights, the right to water, the right to electricity. All of those are enshrined in our constitution. But we know what's happening now. We know what's happening with load shedding, but we also know what's happening with water more critically, because I think, with the absence of potable water comes a lot of other social problems, social and health problems. So through the panel this morning, I'm hoping that we'll unpack some of these issues, perhaps not all of them, but I also invite the floor to engage around these issues, because I think, like Bongani called you, you're the foot soldiers, you're the people on the ground, you're the people that have to, that people approach when they have disputes that they would like resolved. And so it would be good to learn from your own experiences as well. I want to end it there, and as I end it, I want to invite Professor Pityana, Professor Bani Pityana. I don't have his resume. You will forgive me, Prof, but many of you will know. For a long time, Prof was the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa. Prof is currently Chair of the National Lottery Commission. And Prof is a very well-known activist, political activist in South Africa. Thank you very much, Prof.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and share with you at this meeting. I only arrived yesterday, having been attending a conference, an international law conference in England. I kind of said, yes, of course I'm available, so why don't I come? So I came, but I made another decision. I said, I don't really want to know much about who I'm going to talk to. I want to kind of get them blind and just say what is in my heart. What I am here for is what I really caught is this idea of access to justice, something that I am extremely passionate about. I started by saying that I was at this international law conference on the crime of apartheid. In 1973, the United Nations passed the convention on the suppression and punishment of apartheid, of the crime of apartheid. And that convention came into law 3 years later, in 1976. The question I'm being asked at this international conference of international law experts, the question I'm being asked is, how is it that South Africa itself has never signed or ratified this international convention to date, up to this day? Whereas many other countries out there have rallied around at the time to signal the opprobrium that people had about apartheid is an evil system that needed to be suppressed and punished. The second question that arises is, why is it that nobody has ever been punished for the crime of apartheid? Not even in South Africa. Nobody is serving trial in jail today for their activities in the crime of apartheid. To make matters worse, even to this day, there are people who are creating kind of communities of apartheid around this country, where black people are never to be seen, not even to work, not to be there, none whatsoever in our country. In other words, apartheid is dead. Long live apartheid. Nobody has been charged for that crime to this day. And so in international law, you're trying to find out how does international law actually functions. And of course, we all know that as South Africa, we are in a bit of a trouble at the moment because we are signed up to the Rome Statute. And the Rome Statute actually, within it includes 4 basic things: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc. It says very specifically in the international Rome Statute, it says very specifically, it includes the crime of apartheid. Now, we are now presented as South Africa with an arrest warrant for a certain gentleman called Putin, who is expected to come to South Africa for something totally different, for a BRICS summit. The whole country is in a tease. What do we do with Putin? Many people now, the name Putin has been. South Africa abides by the international statutes in Parliament. And Mandela says such a statement is empty and meaningless in the face of what my being here epitomizes the daily experience of many black people. You can go to the court next door. In the criminal court, there will be a black person. In the daily experiences of the people, you wouldn't see that. He repeated much of that statement because in it he says, I was brought up in the home of the regent of the Abatemu people. And the regent, people came in and out, the regent was there, and everybody participated in this application of a just resolution of problems in the communities. And he said even the fact that many people were able to recall similar cases that happened at a certain time that were decided in particular ways. Those things, stare decisis that we talk about today, were in fact a staple diet in the way in which justice was done, in the traditional court of the region that I said. And you are saying that since then, I've had this deep sense of justice that got me ultimately to both qualify as a lawyer and to be now engaged in the politics to try to change this situation that I find in my country today. It's quite much the same statement, I think, made in the Rivonia trial as well. Although that one was probably a lot more serious than it was in the magistrate's court because it could have been handled. Now many of us believe that the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa that was passed by Parliament in 1996 signals a radically different way in which justice is understood compared to the apartheid system. some of the formalities, of course, of a justice system have not changed very much. In other words, there's a judge, there's a prosecutor, there are police who enforce the law, etc. Some parts of it in formalism are not changed. But what I think the Constitution wants us to know, and I want to read the first chapter, not the first chapter, the first chapter of the first section of the Constitution. And which statement I'm saying is fundamentally a statement that is at odds with what apartheid was about. The Republic of South Africa is one sovereign, democratic state founded on the following values: human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms. And that, open the Constitution, that's the first statement you will get. Because it summarizes the rest of the Constitution. Because it says that it captures the real intention of state and of human relations in the country, to the extent that these are organized in the way in which the state has a duty to do. It will do so for no other purpose than to enhance human dignity, equality, and human rights and freedoms. But it also says, contrary to anything that had been before, that the state is one. There are not many little mini-states in this country. In many respects, in my view, that is a problem with the provinces, because it's confusing this idea of a unitary state. There are some people who still think that we are a federation of 9 states, which we are not. It was never the intention. So if I had my will, would abolish the provinces tomorrow, because they are setting the country and its progress towards equity backwards. It says something else, which, for purposes of this discussion, I want to highlight. It says the supremacy of the law, the supremacy of the Constitution, and the rule of law. So the next thing it says, that any organization in which the state functions has to be according to the Constitution, and it must be according to the rule of law. Now, I tell people, many years ago I was refused admission by the apartheid government as an attorney. And because I had been under banning orders and house arrest and banished and God knows what, and I'd been in and out of jail on trial, on imprisonment without trial. So when I finished articles, finished the legal profession, so the normal thing to do, you petition the court for admission, which I sought to do. But the Law Society said it would oppose my admission, because I have a criminal conviction for defying a banning order. Now, in their own warped sense of justice, they say that the courts can only dispense justice if you are found guilty, it's because you are found guilty justly, which I didn't agree with. But listen to this. Some 18, 20 years later, I come back and I resubmit my petition. And then I appear before J.J. Fagan, who receives this petition in the Cape High Court. Now, as I'm now resubmitting this petition 20 years later, the same Cape Law Society and the same Secretary of the Council who had written a letter previously to say we will oppose this application because of your conviction as a criminal conviction. Now they say we'll be happy to support your application. The same guy, the same secretary who was there 20 years before, he had forgotten that he had actually signed a letter in a different way before. Now, but here's the thing. But the judge, J.J. Fagan, with Chetty acting judge as he then was, Fagan says to the court, it is my humble obligation to admit you, Dr. Pichana, as an attorney, and I'm happy to do so. But I want you to know that if it is possible for me to make an apology for the injustice that you have suffered for 20 years, I do so now.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, this concept of justice is evolving, seemingly evolving. But it has got limits. It can't evolve forever. So the limits are set within our Constitution. That is why we say all conduct, all human conduct, all conduct of the state must be confined within the parameters of the Constitution and the rule of law. Some of us used to say that the apartheid system, when we were, during that time, even in apartheid we did study the rule of law. But we always used to say it's ruled by law. Because actually, this minority people passed law in their own interests and without regard to the well-being and interests of the then 90% of the population of the country. So now we have a responsibility in the new South Africa that both the Constitution becomes meaningful for each and every South African. We have a responsibility to make sure that when we talk about the rule of law, that the law not only does it reflect the majority of the members of parliament, but also it reflects by far a sense of justice that every South African ought to have and believe in. And to the extent that it ceases to do that, then it ceases to be a just system. And that is where you come in. Where you come in as civil society is how you unpack for people, how does one unpack this so that an ordinary citizen in our country understands both the rights that they have and the limitations of those rights. In ensuring human conduct that affects other people, whether within the family or in the neighborhood or in the state in any manner whatsoever. And those who are public servants, who have a public duty to confer certain rights and responsibilities, they have a duty to do so, as the Bill of Rights says, justly, in a just administrative action. Now, the problem, though, is probably that is easier said than done. Because I have a sense, and many of you may have an experience, of the, in every respect in our country, the breakdown in law and the efficacy of law that has become for many poor ordinary South Africans as good as meaningless. The kind of meaninglessness that Mandela spoke about in 1962, many people are experiencing today. Meaningless because communities are broken and society is broken. And it is broken because of the inability for the systems of state to render justice to people who deserve it. And seeing that, the thing that I've previously talked about, what then happens is what is happening. I gave the example of the policemen who were shooting each other the other day. You end up with a situation where there is no regard for law or the safety and the humanity of the other. Far too many South Africans live in fear, in their own neighborhood, in their own homes, wherever they are. Even if we were to go to the police are afraid. Do you know that the police stations in our country are being guarded by security guards in many places? Why is that? If the police are guarded by security guards, where are the paralegal people? Who guards the paralegals? Who guards the ordinary South African at the place where they work, who are trying to make the best in West Dean and elsewhere, who are trying to deal with the crime that suffocates the people in their own homes, in their neighborhoods? Who guards the people who have to live under the whim of the gangs in gangland in the Western Cape or elsewhere? Because the police are not there. Because they are looking after their own safety much more than they do the safety of the ordinary citizens. But then, in circumstances like those, when we talk about access to justice, it's a very interesting combination of terms. Because I've said, and I've been saying to you all along, that by the Constitution, justice is the norm. It is available to you wherever you are, whatever the circumstances, whoever you are. But then we say, actually, even though justice is the norm, it may not be accessible to you. It may not be available when you need it most. It may be opaque because the people who actually carry out justice do not do so in a manner that is intended to produce a just solution to the problem. Because the Constitution also says that everybody has a right to have any matter of dispute between them to be resolved in a court of law or tribunal or forum. But actually, I made that like that, in a court of law, a tribunal or forum. The intention about that is the recognition that not everything is to be resolved in the courts. There is a tendency in our country to begin to think that everything you run to the court, but courts actually are prohibitively expensive and they shouldn't be. The reason they are largely is because we lawyers make our business out of your misery. And we shouldn't be. And there is no way of regulating, it seems, that the conduct of lawyers, which is supposed to be regulated by the Legal Practice Council, doesn't work. And I come from the old school of lawyers where ethics and morality were very, very important in the conduct and the practice of law. I'm not so sure any longer. The second thing it says that there can be another tribunal, which is not a court per se. It can be a tribunal that is formal or informal, which is set up for a particular purpose to resolve a particular dispute. And thirdly, it can be a forum. I heard the CEO talk about informal or non-formal forum, but it is still a forum that actually is devised for the purpose of a fair and just resolution of a dispute. But actually, access to justice is not just about disputes. Dispute is one leg of about the assurance. That's what justice must do, is to give you the assurance that you will live a life of dignity and humanity. That life of fairness and justice is yours as a citizen or as a person who resides in this country under the protection of our Constitution. Which means then that you should be able, in such a context and in such a system, you should be able, wherever you go, whether you go to buy things in the shop or to lay by or to open an account or to get into a bus or to get into a taxi, one knows the abuse that ordinary people suffer every day in trying to receive a fair and a just dispensation in their own country. If you don't know it, you just need to take a taxi at the taxi rank in downtown. And I was very pleased for a while when the owners of the taxi, Mr. what is his name now? Anyway, when he was saying that we want our clients to feel comfortable in our transport and to be treated with dignity and respect. Of course, that is given. Of course, that must be the case. But is it the case? No. No, far from it. You get it in labor disputes. The annual round of strikes, etc. As a trade unionist or aggrieved worker, you have a right to protest. But so also is someone else who's not aggrieved. People actually reach out to care for the less needy or more needy people and try to make their lives better. That's how the balancing of life in traditional communities is done. A few months ago, I was checking this paper as I was coming in now. I was talking at Nelson Mandela University with one of the brightest silks there are in this country, Tembeka Ngwaitobi, debating the question of indigenous law and access, and transforming the justice system. And I began that by reflecting on the novel by my own grandfather, by the way, S. And the picture you have there about how people access justice, and indeed ultimately how the chief in that case resolved the dispute. And it talks about a system of law that is open. To the extent that it is indigenous, it is owned by the people. In other words, they know what to expect. They expect nothing less, nothing different, because they know that's how it works. The former Justice Albie Sachs would rave at us about the conceptualization of the Constitutional Court here. The idea of justice under the treaty, which he believes is from the indigenous law, but the substance of it is not just you covered from the sun, right? May well be the case. But the substance of it is justice without walls. It is justice in a sense that has no limitations except justice itself. So, because if it is not just, then it doesn't fit within those walls. It is outside those walls. Those invisible walls are the basis on which, whenever we approach a system of justice, we expect it to be just. And to the extent that it is considered to be unjust, then it is outside of those invisible walls of justice. And that's where the dispute comes in. Now, I just think the legal system in our country has been rendered in many, many, many respects these days toothless and meaningless. And the duty we have, I don't know how. We need to reform our system of justice. I do not somehow, I do not believe that the indigenous courts bill that the government has put up is a solution. But we need a reformed totality of the justice system in our country. That will actually be meaningful to the extent that the people who are in charge of that justice system. One of the ways, by the way, the jury system in other countries, lay magistrates, instead of depending only on a particular magistrate, why don't we get respected lay people to be the dispensers of justice? So we need a lot of rethinking, which I'm not hearing very much today. But one thing that I know is that at the heart of any justice system is the people themselves. Thank you.
Such a packed talk by Prof. Prof, thank you so much. I mean, you're raising quite a number of issues around, I mean, I like the example that you used at a taxi rank. What is a taxi rank or train station? Because I think often, whenever we think of justice, we always think of it, you know, in a court system. But we actually don't think of the system on our day-to-day lives, for instance. I mean, issues around dignity and really getting a sense of service. You know, you can do that in a just and a fair manner. I mean, one of the things I always battle with when it comes to the law is that, you know, often the law can be passed, or whatever the judgment can be passed, but is it a just conviction? You know, was did we achieve justice? Because as we know that within the law, you still have got a lot of technicalities, which by virtue of not, I suppose, fulfilling certain technicalities as a result, then a person who is aggrieved might not necessarily get justice because there are certain aspects of the technicalities that are not fulfilled. As a result, then there's no justice. So like issues around, around conducting ourselves in a fair and dignified manner, for me, it's one of the things that are really standing out because they talk to where we are in our communities. Before you even take a matter to court, how are we treating our people with dignity? Are we providing fair services? Are we hearing the people when they speak or when they come to us? Sometimes when you try to access just a basic service, sometimes you feel, in fact, the system is actually very violent towards you. Like for instance, this thing of, you still find clinics that there's certain services that you get on particular days, no problem. And if you don't know, like you're sick, whatever, you go there, no, actually, the problem you are here for, we're only attending it on Thursday. It's a Monday today. How would you have known? Because you actually expect a service to be rendered to you at a particular time. And yeah, it's such an interesting thing also, Prof, even when you look at how, the three, what we refer to as the three spheres of government, where you find that, this service is actually a mandate of a different sphere, but not this particular sphere. Ordinary people, we don't know. Government is government. So we're not interested as to who renders. So this sphere is responsible for this, and this sphere is responsible for that. So I suppose even that for me, I often find that problematic because sometimes you can't find, or rather you don't get certain services because maybe you are in a particular jurisdiction. Sometimes you find that there was a case that happened here, but in fact you must go report that case 100 kilometers away from where the incident happened because it's outside of that jurisdiction. I think there's just so much around the law versus justice versus fairness that in fact the three are sort of like independent of each other. In some of the context. So thank you so much, Prof, for really, provoking us and the background that, when you started around apartheid crime, and I like how you pointed that in fact it was an intentional crime. It's actually very, very deep when you think about it. And when you say that, my mind immediately went to corruption, because in fact corruption is intentional crime, basically. And it's unjust because you are actually robbing people who are deserving of whatever service that in fact are supposed to be getting. We have a few minutes. I'll take maybe just a few hands. If people want to comment, have questions, to Prof, whatever that's back in your mind as Prof was giving the talk. So when you, I'm not sure how, can you assist me, sorry? We've got roving mics, we've got 3 of them. Ben, can you also assist me? So, because we've got 3 microphones. All right. So when you introduce, or rather before you speak, just tell us who you are, and then you can speak. I saw the first hand there. Yeah. And then Tarinyana will be next. Then Makwela will be the 3rd person, and Soli 4th, and Dladla the 5th person. In that order.
All right, thank you. or maybe make a comment on this matter here. There's a community patrollers around our communities. And I just want to check with you if what they are doing are they offering justice to our people? I understand most of those groups, they will shambok these guys and all that, but at last they do police work and somehow communities believe that they are serving justice, because ultimately people get peace to say at least you've got what you wanted, something like that. So, and also they are serving a police job, because most of the cases, they will recover those stolen properties and then. So our people see those groups as a justice. Somehow they are serving justice for them. So I just want to hear from his point, is that what he also thinks?
Thanks.
When the law fails, self-help comes in.
Yeah.
So people will do whatever they think is right because the law has failed. Actually, I say somewhere that South Africa is a self-help state. You know, we pay tax and we do things, but if you can afford it, you go to a private hospital, or your children go to a private school, or you live in a neighborhood that is whatever these things that they limit people who come in. You have your own security people you pay for. It's the biggest industry in the country at the moment, because the police are not able to do the work they're supposed to do sufficiently. And so on and so on. We've become, in many, many, many respects, many people who can afford it are double taxed. Now, that is, and I'm very sorry, oftentimes the government doesn't seem to realize this. That happens not because of the vibrancy of the economy, but because of the failure of government. Because government fails, people find alternative ways of continuing to make their living. So you go around, they are afraid in a certain community where I live, there's potholes. So the community goes round and they close the potholes and they brand them, they put their own name, whatever it is there. That is the life, it's a self-help society. When that happens, then government is broken down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the sooner we realize that something that government doesn't seem to realize, that in fact they are governing, I don't know for who.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Hlanganisa. I'm from Metsimogolo Community Advice Office in Sasolburg. Prof, I listened very intently when you made your presentation here. It made me think back a while. It made me really think back to the late 70s, early 80s when we started advice offices and the role of advice offices by then. My understanding when we started advice office was that we regarded advice offices as a form of struggle, because the role that we were playing by then was to work with liberation movements, to assert certain programs that were meant to assist the project of liberation. And then came the release of Nelson Mandela, the unbanning of political organizations, and suddenly all those organizations that were sympathetic to our cause decided to pull back their support. The reason purely was South Africa is no more under apartheid. South Africans are free now. And therefore, there's no more need for the South African oppressed to be given any form of assistance anymore. But the reality is, I hear you mention in several parts of your speech, making a comparison of the then and the now, which to me tells us a lot about our society today. It calls upon us as community advice officers to re-look at ourselves, to say, have we really made strides? If the situation is still the same as it was 28 years back, what kind of society are we growing? What kind of future do we want to portray or paint for our children? Are we encouraging a situation where even our children have to grow up in a system where everybody is complaining but incapable of doing anything, of changing the status to make it better? And when I look at that, I realize that our people all over, through many initiatives, are doing things to improve and better their own circumstances. But at the same time, the same government that we continuously vote in, the same politicians that we put our faith in, do not care about what we're doing. But again, there's this level of ignorance that we continue to put them back into power. Yet we continue to complain. Now, I'm trying to figure what should be the role of advice officers in the circumstances like this. Because when we go out and teach people about their rights, which is part of our mandate, which is part of what we're doing, we are seen as enemies in our own communities. We are seen as enemies by the authorities. So we are in a fix, Prof. We are in a fix. The willingness is there, the passion is there. And most of the people who are sitting here, they are people who are from NPOs. NPOs are generally unrecognized. Most of them are doing this work without a pay, without any cent, doing what the government is supposed to be doing. But they are sacrificing themselves. They don't sleep. Sometimes they work 24 hours to bring justice to the people. But the problem here, Prof, is in your thinking, what is it that can be done to empower a sector like advice officers so that these sectors can have a much more stronger say, can be listened to, can be taken seriously, and be allowed space to make inputs? Because we are living within the communities, we know the reality on the ground, and we think our input, if allowed space to do that, can bring about change in terms of, making bills or laws or whatever. We think we can make an input that can change people's life, but we are not given a space, we are not given a platform to express our experiences so that we can change our country for the better. So the question that I'm trying to put forward is, in your thinking, Prof, is there any mechanism, any way, anything that you can propose to us that we can undertake that can bring that kind of effectiveness into what we're doing before we get tired? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I request that maybe you take this to Prof and then you'll respond to us.
Perhaps let me talk about access to justice, formal and informal, let's say. But in a situation where we are based as community advance, also community CEOs, whoever you might call us, an element of community mediation, wherein you actually resolve those minor problems in communities and etc., small families and etc. Versus the formal access to justice system, wherein whatever implementation you might be engaged with in an informal system should be within the confinements of the law. Now, the question arises to say, in practical terms, when dealing with matters, for instance, that revolves around family conflict also, in the most marginalized communities, poverty-stricken communities also. One of those outcomes, you might find that one of the family members, has been triggering one of those conflicts because they've got power in one way or another. And now, community mediation, its intention is to make sure that, you build a family, where you live and then there's a handshake and, communities, come together and move on as one. But now, you have got another element of community which one has to focus on punitive matter, which is an original access to the legal system which is there. Once you invoke that particular element, then you leave a particular family without food on the table. And now, sometimes, yes, community will have to say, yes, you did very well, because now you have invoked punitive measures. At the same time, whoever is left in the community can't even eat, can't even work, because you've taken the bread off the table. Then we say, access to justice in poor communities, it's really getting affected by poverty, stricken communities. So to me, I want to just to stop there, because I think to me poverty has been really affecting, the real implementation of access to justice in communities.
Thanks, Mr. McQuarrie. So I suppose then the question is around, how do you navigate poverty as a factor in achieving justice in a nutshell? So I'm not sure Prof. will be able to navigate around issues of poverty.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Dada Mukeki. I'm coming from Hlanganisa Victim Empowerment Forum, and I'm the provincial secretary for Kahosa in the Free State. My question, Prof, is based on your speech when you talk about community upliftment. Communities had uplifted themselves by forming the community advice offices. And as a chairperson of the National Lottery Commission, I'm thinking it's one of the things, and previously we learned that you come from this sector. And we are hoping that you will be doing more. Because if you check now what the government is doing, they are making the cut-off relating to the funding that the communities need to be accessing from the Department of Social Development. And now your entity as National Lottery Commission is there in order for us to access, because now there is a cut-off from the Department of Social Development. But now we are finding the injustice, because we need to get the endorsement letters from the Department of Social Development, the chief social workers, whom they don't know the services that we are rendering within our community advice offices. And that makes the whole thing, because if they don't know, we cannot access the funds that they are supposed to be coming to us. That's why most of the community advice offices are closing down. Can you consider, in order to be doing something relating to the state, the endorsement done by the Department of Social Development, social workers, relating for us to access funding. Thank you.
Thanks.
About 2 weeks ago, I had communities and local development and local upliftment. And we're having a memorandum of understanding with the department in order to provide effective support to communities and the work that they do. You know, the National Lotteries Commission dispenses last year about 1.2 billion rand to local communities, etc. But actually, that is totally inadequate, because in it there is support for emergencies and the floods and everything else that has been going on, alongside supporting organizations, large and small, that are working to uplift their communities. And part of the reason is the answer to the question that we've got. We started off with the government of President Mandela, really the government wanting to carry the weight of the community, the weight of suffering and all of that. That in the end paralyzed many communities. In support, they were not getting the support because the government will do it, the ANC will do it, and all of that stuff. When towards the end of President Mbeki's, before he was kicked out by his party, he was exploring seriously, I thought, the whole idea of what a developmental state is supposed to be. As a country, the safety net system, and let me tell you, poverty of the kind we have in this country is unjust, is not justice. 350 rand that you receive is not justice. It is in fact an insult to people. But my sense is that there is no creative thinking in government about how to respond to the needs of the people. Actually, I have a feeling that sometimes the ANC has been in government for too long. I think they're rather tired. I think government has become tired and they can't think straight anymore. So the reason for this memorandum of understanding with Department of Social Development is for us to work together to add to what the department does and what the lottery does, so that you can develop a model of self-development by people and communities. That will be a lot better than the 350 and whatever you have at the moment. We can never say that there must be no safety net or whatever. We can never say that. But obviously the 350 is just far from adequate for people to live on. So, coming to your question, it is true that at the beginning of the new dispensation, and indeed it is true that the period before the establishment of advice centers and CBOs, etc., was a very important and dynamic intervention by communities themselves to support each other, to support their work. And then the National Development Agencies was established, which was intended to provide most of the resources you're talking about that were no longer given. Those agencies said we can't give money to the government, but we can actually, we can't give money to you, not even the SACC that used to support a lot of this work. or Black Sash, or people like that. But that the grant funding that used to be given will be part of a bilateral relationship between our governments and your government. As a result of that, the National Development Agency was established. Now, I've come to understand that the National Development Agencies receives, I heard the other day, something like, is it 200 million rand? Which is totally nowhere near enabling them to do the work that they're supposed to do. So there is something that needs to be done to reconsolidate these things and make them meaningful. Even the 1.4 billion rand that the lottery has available to distribute, we are told that 1.4 billion rand was stolen by corrupt people in the last couple of years, I don't know how long. And so the money never went to the people, and the people started, some of them, the members of the board and the executives of they started enriching themselves and buying things you know not what. And not understanding that this thing was intended for people who need the most. So the idea is to try to change the way in which we've been operating so that those things will never happen again. So I would say that from the government's point of view, there can be no reason that the CBOs and the advice centers are not supported. I know that the legal aid offices were strengthened when Minister Dalla Omar was Minister of Justice. And I don't know how far they have been able since then to work with paralegal offices around the country. Because the idea was that they provide support to the paralegal activists so that they can have a semblance of justice and the tools with which they can actually make sure that justice is brought to the people. That needs to be looked at again. I'm sure you do have access to Minister Ronald Lamula about this. You probably should get him to come and talk to you about those things. Now, I wanted to come back to that first question over there, but I've forgotten it.
The vigilante question
Yeah.
or the poverty.
I've already answered that.
Yeah, I've already answered
I've answered that.
No, you also did answer the one on the vigilante one when you said it's
Yes.
because the state is broken.
That's right, yeah.
And therefore people are doing things for themselves.
I think, all I can stand here and say is that we have to continue to encourage and strengthen organizations. Government must do that, and must do so not in a partisan political way. So I think that it is very, very important for government to understand the role of this community that is here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Colleagues, thank you. Sola. So shall we So, may I ask that we take a short break for tea? The time now is... The time now is... which Bongiwe is going to be moderating for us. I'm going to hand over to her now, so that then she can start with the second session. Bongiwe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bongani. Thank you, colleagues. I hope you've had a good morning so far. It's a pity that the Prof is not here. I wish to thank him in absentia for the very insightful contribution to this conversation. But before we start, just to help us settle in, I want to invite this wonderful young lady Nkateko. Perhaps she should tell us what her name means before she starts. I just want to invite her to talk to us in a different language. Yeah? Nkateko.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Nkateko, Black womanhood, because that is my lived experience. That is the only reality that I know. So a couple of years ago, I was commissioned by a local publication to write a poem responding to gender-based violence. And this was a campaign that was called Don't Look Away. And the poem that I wrote was about 16 days of activism and the inadequacy thereof, because every day should be a day of activism. In fact, every day should be a day that is free from harm for all of us, but unfortunately that is not the reality that we live in. This poem is titled, What Happens on Day 17? 16 days of activism, you say. So tell me, what happens on day 17? Perhaps if on day 17, our loved ones would wake up from their graves, bodies unbattered, necks untwisted, killers jailed or in the ground where they took others, it would make sense. It would be easier to understand those 16 days. But instead, we are digging graves. Graves on top of other graves, graves stretching as far as our swollen, beaten, black and blue eyes can see. Names trailing behind hashtags, none of them Lazarus, none of them waking up, none of them coming home. And on day 17, the chanting is softer. The mourners are fewer because the dead have multiplied.
Thank you. And it's very well picked, because I think a lot of our paralegals deal with gender-based violence on a daily basis, cases of domestic violence, and which is how our Sisterhood Advocates program was born, in recognition that we need to continue the work beyond the offices, take the work into our communities 24/7, and that's exactly what we're doing. Please join us after lunch for the award ceremony as we recognize the incredible work that is done by our Sisterhood Advocates on the ground. Thank you very much for reminding us of it. Thank you. At this point, colleagues, I want to invite our panelists. I don't have any of their resumes, and you will forgive me. You know, I look forward to a very insightful conversation. May I ask, starting from the side, Teresa. Teresa is with Pro Bono, and they're doing incredible work around providing legal services, legal support here. Please take a seat, Teresa. You get to pick the seat of your choice, eh? Doing incredible work with making sure that those who can afford legal representation, cannot afford legal representation, get it. And also bringing back the ethics and the morality that Prof spoke about into the legal profession. Yeah? Thank you for joining us, Teresa. I'm going to invite Lebo Ramafuko. Lebo is a social justice activist, also chair of our board, but today she's wearing a different hat. Yeah, Lebo? Today, she's a social justice activist. Lebo is currently with Oxfam and is also going to be bringing us a lot of insights into social justice and what justice means for our people. Thank you, Lebo. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite Evaristo Buenera. I hope I pronounced that right. Professor Evaristo is in academia, a scholar of political science, and joins us this morning to give us a different perspective, hopefully not too much of an academic perspective, Evaristo, but a practical perspective around our justice system and how it is configured and some of the things we need to be thinking about as we have these conversations. Our last panelist is Dr. Nkosana Moyo. I called him professor earlier. He corrected me and said, no, he's not a professor. Dr. Moyo, please come through. Dr. Moyo is, I always am a little bit unsure whenever I introduce Dr. Moyo because sometimes he identifies as a scientist, quite often he does as a scientist, but I think also the founder of Mandela Institute for Development Studies, which does a lot of development work on the continent. So hopefully we can also get his insights on the concept of justice. How do we deliver justice? We were hoping that we would have somebody from CAOSA to ground us a little bit more in the paralegal space and talk about how paralegals are a critical entry point into the justice system and the work that they're doing. Unfortunately, we couldn't secure anybody. Tsenolo, is she here? Sheila. Oh, Sheila. Oh, Sheila is joining us later in the day. No, I mean she's on the program later in the day. But welcome, Sheila. I have not yet seen you. Welcome. We look forward to hearing from you later in the day. So this is our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to ask each one of them to, first of all, in the first 5 minutes, use 5 minutes of their time to just tell us about their own perspectives around these issues. And then we'll have a more interactive session after they've done that. I'm just reminded, one of the things that Prof said, as he quoted former President Nelson Mandela, I'm a black man in a white man's court. Yeah. I was just reminded that it's not every law that is just. In fact, the apartheid system, as Prof pointed out, had a set of laws, but those were unjust laws. So I think as we deliberate today, we need to think about how just our laws are, and what and that interface between justice and the law. Yeah, and I'm hoping our panelists will take us through that journey. I'm going to start with you, Lebo, because you're closest to me, and I'll just ask you to take 5 minutes. And if I start giving you this weird look, you've gone way above your time here. Yeah. So please just pay attention to the audience as well as my face, yeah? So that you can see that weird look. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Lebo.
Thank you. When I listen to Prof. Pichana, and this is not part of my 5 minutes, it's just reflecting on this, is that I felt, or I wished that we were in church because there were so many amen moments. So as somebody who likes particularly Pentecostal churches, I wanted to say amen, amen. But I realized I needed to behave because I think he grounded a lot of what I think we are all going to share and talk about in such richness of history, but also of the complexity of what we are talking about. I will speak a lot about social justice because there is access to justice, but if we really define it narrowly, we may just miss what justice means in its broadest sense. And just by definition, social justice is used quite a lot, but But in fact, what it means is that it is concerned with a just distribution of wealth, opportunities, privileges, and burdens within a society. And so we could spend my first 5 minutes in unpacking what that means, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. So if this is about the just distribution of wealth, opportunities, privileges within a society, how does an unequal society like South Africa become a just society? So already we do know that we are living in a country with such great inequality, the most unequal country in the world. So how can it be a just society? But also, how does a capitalist society, because by definition, capitalism is winner takes all, and capitalism is not neutral. Capitalism was aided by colonialism, capitalism was aided by heteronormativity, where the men, particularly the white men, would then get the spoils first. And therefore, how do you speak of social justice or even the notion of justice in a capitalist society, in a country that its own capitalist bedrock, economic bedrock, was aided by very overtly racist laws that we really have not done much to unpack? So our economy was founded on not only a capitalist system on its own that is unjust because it's winner take all, but it was propped up by a very overtly racist system called apartheid that we did not dismantle. But also, how does corruption aid or hamper the attainment of social justice? But for me, it is not only the corruption that our current leaders are taking, because we must also guard against a very racist notion that because black people are in power, they are taking money. And I'm not saying they are not taking money. I am just saying we need to also problematize what that means. And but for me, I want to talk about corruption in a country like South Africa, as it happens post-democracy, around the lack of accountability mechanisms. Because I want to believe that in many societies corruption happens, but if there are no accountability mechanisms, how do you even, when wrongdoing, like the big amounts of money that we spent on the Zondo Commission, that was very just. We needed to find out what happened, but it's not leading anywhere. The first case in the Free State, the case was so poorly prepared that we did not actually get the justice. So when there is no accountability mechanism, and we have seen it over and over again, what does that mean? And then, you know, it could be easy to then say, well, the problem lends itself with government. The problem is government's problem. But I do think that we also need to turn the focus a little bit on ourselves, even as we respond as civil society organizations. So on one level, there are a lot of responses, and those responses need to be applauded. You are part of the people that are responding to where government is failing, there is no doubt. But is the way that we are responding helpful? And when I say helpful, I'm not saying it's not fulfilling a need, but I'm saying, could it be improved? And there is more and more a word that is being used that I want to put here just as a thought around our own responses that feminism has brought on, and is the issue of intersectionality. And how intersectional are our responses? So on one level, we are responding, we are doing good work. But on another level, we have sliced the program so siloed or thinly, I don't know what the right word is, that our own efforts and power gets diluted. Okay? So, and intersectionality is hard. I'm not trying to assume that it is not hard. And I'm going to make an example with something that I I think is topical, but I think it's messy in the way that it's topical. And it's in how we deal with people we call illegal immigrants in South Africa. Now you will see, I bet you, that in the lead up to the elections, that's going to be a kickball that different political parties are going to everybody is going to have something to say. I've always struggled with the notion of xenophobia. Because I think for me personally, the notion of xenophobia basically puts the blame on an individual. You are reacting this way to somebody foreign because there is something wrong with you. Your beliefs are incorrect, okay? But for me, the word that I find very, very useful is displacement. Because across Africa, people are being displaced by political uncertainty, they are being displaced by economic uncertainty, and more people are being displaced by climate. Climate justice becomes an issue. So across the world, now look at the war in Ukraine, look at other crises in Sudan and stuff like that, and how people who are getting displaced by virtue of the color of their skin, the world responds, you know? So when it's us and it's black people, it's xenophobia, but when it's happening elsewhere, it's a crisis that we must respond to. And the words and the language that we use is very, very different. So I am always curious and suspicious when that happens. But the reason why I like the word displacement and I want to bring it to intersectionality is look at how we are responding. Now the point of the matter is, all of us who are working there, lawyers, foundations that are doing good work in saying to government, but you can't cancel this permit, and they are doing good work. They fall short of saying, but what is happening at a community level? So when you go to communities, it's a completely different ballgame. I was born in Manzivile, 5,000 households in the Westlands. The people of Manzivile are saying, this government wants these foreigners, and we are going to kick them out of our townships. And that for me demonstrates the lack of intersectionality, even when we address a very complex problem. Because the lawyers will go, there's victory now that the permits is unlawful, but it falls short of saying, but what is happening at community level? And if you live in Cape Town, which I must confess I do, we'll talk about why it's a confession at lunch, is then you get into WhatsApp groups of people who say, oh, do you have a Malawian? I need a Malawian to come and look after my children because they are so obedient. And you're like, hello, these are the people who will be matching with the foundations and saying, don't let them go away. Is it about human rights? Or is it about exploitation? And then you go to Khayelitsha and people are saying they are taking our jobs. So I'm picking on that because it is messy, but it is a clear demonstration for me of how even when we respond, we are even blind to the intersectionality of our own responses. And I think my invitation to all of us representing big organizations, NPOs and all of that, need to ask ourselves what amount of unlearning we need to do. You know, it's easy to say government is doing this, government is not doing that. I mean, it's easy. I can do that in my sleep. Wake me up 2 a.m. I can tell you what government is not doing to achieve justice. But I think the other lens that needs to be put on is on our own responses as civil society. I mean, one of the things that I can tell you in my closing is that even as we were engaging in this room, I was watching how in fact the responses were mainly from males. And I know working with CBOs that even CBOs are patriarchal, very patriarchal. So how are we speaking about women empowerment, GBV, everything, water, hunger, and everything, when we are not questioning ourselves? What's happening with the competition of NGOs? I mean, if you look at the rise of NGOs, just in the HIV field, In fact, research is very interesting in saying at the rise of CBOs and NPOs in HIV, the rights language diminished. And why? It's because there was a lot of money in HIV. So everybody opened something to go to HIV. But it did not advance the rights discourse. In fact, it compromised it. I'm sure my 5 minutes is up. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nebu. Thank you for highlighting some of those important issues that there's so much in the media, and I think the media itself is complicit, in how some of these issues get reported. But there's certainly a lot of discourse around, intersectionality, migrants, what you call the illegal migrants, or undocumented migrants, as I like to say, but also how civil society is organized or organizes to respond to some of these issues. I'd like to pick up, not now, at a later stage, I'd like to pick up about what you said about the amount of money we spent on the Zondo Commission and, the inactivity that's happening there, but and maybe just talk about the role of the state and whether or not we have the competence in the state. You talked about the case, the Free State case that was presented and was so badly put together. What are some of the bottlenecks in us achieving justice? You will see from Lebo's conversation why I have 2 males and 2 females on the panel. I just didn't want to get caught up in the politics. So if I go to Teresa now, I'll be accused of starting with the females. So Evaristo, do you want to go next? Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. How are you? Can you see me? Okay, I've got what they call presidential height in Zambia. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share. I will begin with a confession. I missed part of Professor Bani Bichwana's presentation because I was busy with something else, and for that I'm sorry. And secondly, by way of introduction, I am against the law. Why am I against the law? Because the law is against me. So there's a saying that the law was not meant for you, it was made for you. Today, it's a very great opportunity for us because we are learning to unlearn so that we can relearn other things. And it's very difficult because we are using a colonized mind to decolonize itself. At times, you wish you had 2 heads, the colonized head and the one that is learning the decolonial stuff. Somebody spoke about politicians and how politicians fail us. I do not blame politicians at all. They are doing what politicians do. Scorpions bite. You cannot blame a scorpion for biting. Why do we expect a person to solve a problem that does not affect them? They don't have water shedding, they don't have electricity, they've got generators, they've got blue lights brigade. So when you tell them about going to bed hungry, they have to imagine that maybe you are on a banting diet. So we should not blame them when they fail to solve our problems because it's not their problems. They are just being truthful to themselves. And we had a discussion earlier on with Dr. Nkosana and Bongi about the thinking that we use when we are thinking about our problems. I think the biggest challenge is that we use other people's knowledge to solve our own problems. And the knowledge that we are trying to use to solve our problems is the same knowledge that was used to create the same problems. So we are almost like a dog that is chasing its tail. Whose laws are we enforcing? In my area, life in Zimbabwe, I was working at the brewery. There was a machine that was called the electronic bottle inspector. the job of that machine was to inspect bottles as they come from the market to see if they were proper to be filled with Coca-Cola and then sent back to the market. So this electronic bottle inspector had 21 inspection parameters. Is the word Coca-Cola written properly? Is the diameter of the bottle proper? Is the base of the bottle? Everything. If one of those 21 parameters was out of spec, that glass bottle was squashed and it was sent for recycling. So what the law does for me is to act as the electronic bottle inspector. I am now coming back to the introduction. Colonialism was not simply the occupation of the land. Colonialism was the imposition of 5 institutions that I want us to understand. So the first thing that was imposed as part of the colonial processes was an ideology called capitalism. Of course, African kingdoms had their own forms of capitalism. Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe, Mutapa Empire, the Bunyoro, the Buganda, they had their own forms of capitalism, which was not based on accumulation but exchange. You have got extra goats and you want a cow, so give me 5 goats and I give you 1 cow. There was no profit there. So colonialism came and imposed the ideology of capitalism, which now had something called a profit. So land became an item that could be traded on the market. Life began to focus on the living at the expense of the living unborn and the living dead. Because from an African cosmology, Africa consists of a trilogy. The living unborn, they call them the future generations. The living us, and the living dead, they call them the ancestors. This is why when the Kruger National Park was being taken, there was a contestation of epistemologies between the Tsonga jurisprudence and the Roman Dutch law. The Tsonga people were saying, you cannot say that the Kruger National Park is terra nullius. It's a Latin word for unoccupied lands. Because our ancestors live there. So we are there. You cannot say the Tsonga people are not in the Kruger National Park. We are there spiritually. So why do you use one civilization to judge another civilization? That's colonialism. So the first one is ideology. The second institution that was imposed on Africa as part of the colonial processes is the law, the Roman Dutch law. What that did was that it then crowded out other forms of justice. Because there are many ways of attaining justice. It's not only the law that can be used to attain justice. There are other forms. There's mediation, there's religion, and so on and so on. Thirdly, there is this issue of language that was imposed. Language is not innocent communication. Language carries a civilization. When you commit an epistemicide, when you kill a language, you have killed a civilization. When you speak in a certain language, you are propagating that civilization. I like it when people see a snake. They cry in their mother tongues. You forget English and all the languages will escape because now you are crying for your life. So there is that issue of life. And most importantly and fourthly, Africa was incorporated into the United Nations system of sovereign states, albeit without sovereignty. We have what is called de jure state sovereignty, which is sovereignty at law, but we don't have de facto sovereignty, which is actual sovereignty. This is why the United States can say, we are imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe can do nothing. This is why NATO can say, we are bombing Libya into democracy, and Africa can't do anything. So, because African countries were problematic, agitating for independence in the 60s, the world system said, hang on, these guys are being problematic. Let's incorporate them. Let's relegate them to the United Nations General Assembly. They will make noise there. Then we will make laws in the United Nations Security Council there. It's like what men did to women. Women were agitating for their rights. And men incorporated them, and men started to speak for women. Now women can't complain because we are also speaking for you. It's the same template that was used. So when we think about the law today, we must think about the law as a colonial imposition. And by extension, you must think of the state as a colonial imposition. There are no states in Africa. There are Western states in Africa. The state in Africa is a colonial imposition. And we cannot expect a product of colonialism to behave otherwise. This is why the state today is one, violent. The state today is two, unjust. The state today is three, divisive. When you fill a form, what is your name? Bongi Wendondo. What is your race? I'm black. What is your gender? I am female. Why does the government want to know my race or my ethnicity when we crossed in 1994, when we are all South Africans? So the problem is not the justice system. The problem is higher than that. It is the state itself, which is a colonial creation, and the state continues to dispense colonial mandates, which is to manage and to subjugate the black race. Thank you for listening.
My goodness, that's very challenging, isn't it? He's taken the debate to another level. Thank you very much, Evaristo. I mean, when you talk about the colonial agenda and the law being a product of that colonial agenda, you know, often we say that you cannot plead ignorant of the law, which implies that your grandmother and my grandmother sitting somewhere and perhaps never been to school are affair with the law, that they understand the law. I mean, think about the injustice that is being served there. You know, you are assumed, you cannot plead, there's an assumption made in spite of all our socio-economic indicators pointing otherwise. You know, we've got very low literacy, particularly among rural women. So where do we expect that they would have an understanding or appreciation of the law? Thank you for that, and maybe we'll come back to the colonial agenda and what we need to do, because I think it's not enough to just point out what the challenges are, but what do we do, you know, given that that is our reality. You know, the Roman Dutch law is our reality now, you know, and we've long forgotten about, you know, South Africa, pre-colonial South Africa, and what laws existed and what the, you know, the medium of regulating society looked like. So where to from there? So having had another male talk to us, I will come to Teresa. Teresa?
Thank you, and it's a lot to follow on the first two inputs. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be on the panel this morning. As Bongi has noted, I'm the director of probono.org, and we are an organization that provides free legal services for people who don't have much money in South Africa. So we operate in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. We also work very closely with 6 community advice offices in Gauteng, and that's through a generous grant from the Mott Foundation. I see Lorenzo is left. So I was asked to come and speak briefly on some of the challenges with the systems of law and accessing the systems of law in South Africa. And I speak with an understanding that, you know, we have an imperfect system, and our legal system is based on Roman Dutch law. It's so it's not indigenous. It's been imposed on South Africa and many other African nations. But as Bongi said, this is where we are. This is the reality in which we live with. And I think, you know, first I just want to say we talk about law and justice sometimes interchangeably. And for me, I think it's important to understand that law is not justice. Understand that law is pervasive in our lives. I think of it sometimes as a virus that you can't even see, but you feel the impact of it. You know, you pick up COVID or you pick up some other disease. You don't see it in the air, but suddenly it hits you. You're speeding down the road, and suddenly you're hit with the law because you're breaking the speed limit law. you forget to pay your rates, you forget to file your tax return, then you get a notice from SARS and you got some penalty every month being placed on you. You don't pay your rates, there's another penalty. So the law, everywhere we turn, the law touches our lives. Even you buy something in the grocery store, that food that you buy, the safety of the food is regulated. You just don't go to a farm. If you are shopping in a retail shop, you're not just buying a packet of chicken. Behind that packet of chicken are a whole system of laws and regulations around the safety of that food. And that's a good thing. The law protects us. The law is there, in many, many ways to protect our health, our safety, and our well-being in society. And that's where then it also links to justice. Because the law won't protect us if it doesn't have the full force and power of the state behind it. Otherwise, it's just words on paper. So South Africa, our constitution is heralded the world over as a fantastic constitution which recognizes a full range of rights of not just citizens of South Africa, but anyone who is living in this country. We fall under the protection of the laws. The Constitution protects us. And that's an important thing, but it won't protect us if the state is not there to enforce those laws, to enforce those rights. And so when the state doesn't do it, what it should be doing, or when the law is not working in the way that we want it to work, or we find ourselves faced with legal realities. A loved one has passed away and there's an estate to be settled. There's a house where the deed hasn't transferred for many years, so the name on the deed doesn't reflect any living family member. And then you are entangled in a whole morass of complicated estate law. That's where lawyers come in. And that's where one area where pro bono comes in. And that's where it also gets highlighted that living in poverty makes it so difficult to enter into the legal sphere, to access law, let alone justice. To enter into a whole complicated administrative process to deal with your issues. Professor Pitania said earlier, it's not just about resolving conflicts, it's about resolving like the administration of your life sometimes. So people come to our office and they've got, an estate, a deceased person in a house that they want to settle the deed on the house. And it's expensive. They come, they don't have the right papers, so we have to send them back to find certain papers, or they have to get affidavits certified to show that they're a member, they're related to this person. There's a whole range of administrative issues that come with accessing law, and it's expensive. So you're penalized, the system penalizes you for being poor. It costs money. You've got to pay for transport. You've got to pay for photocopies. If you don't have the right documents, you've got to go back and you've got to pay again. Even if you call, you've got to pay for the phone call because you've got to have airtime or data on a phone. It's so many costs. They're not hidden costs, they're real costs to accessing the law. Then when you talk about really bigger issues or more complex issues, even when you get into issues of accessing justice, it also becomes expensive. So when Professor Pitania, someone was saying that you have to get to a magistrate's court. That magistrate's court is not down the road from you, okay? And you don't even know what happens in the court. So first you've got to find a paralegal or lawyer to explain to you why you're going to need to go to court. And then that's another pile-on of costs. Or if it's not the magistrate's court in your area, you come and say, well, it's an issue that has to go to the high court. That's more money. And if you are unfortunate enough to not fall within the means test, that's set by the Legal Aid Society of South Africa, which currently is 12,500 rands per month. You can't earn more than 12,500 rands per month to access free legal services in the criminal sphere or in the civil sphere. Now, that's not a lot of money. I earn more than 12,500 rands a month. If I had a serious legal issue, every minute, it's like you would go crazy thinking about how those bills get racked up. So the notion that if you earn 13,000 per month, you cannot access free legal services, and there's nowhere you're going to get like discounted currently in South Africa where you're going to get discounted legal services. So then you have LegalWise, which says buy insurance, But in these times, who the hell has money to pay monthly insurance for the possibility that you might need a lawyer? Okay, so the very cost of just stepping into the system, let alone getting whatever issue you have resolved, it's not attainable by most people, and that's the reality. So when we talk about inequality, we talk about South Africa being the most unequal country in the world, that's part of it. If you are living in poverty, even if you are not, you're falling within the definition of being in poverty, you still cannot afford to access. So accessing the system of justice in South Africa, whether it is, and it's not just in South Africa, but it's very much determined on your class, your race, your gender, your geographic location. All of those things come in as barriers, often as barriers. So how do you shift these systemic problems? And they are systemic. The first and ideal way to address it is that you have a functional state, which not only recognizes the problem, but it works diligently to shift the problem. And currently we don't have that. You have people in government, they can articulate and they will articulate what the problems are. They'll say what I've just said, but then they speak as if they have no power to shift it. I've gone to Parliament, I used to work in the land sector. I can remember years ago I took farm workers from Limpopo to Cape Town because the organization I was working with was invited to give an input on farm dweller issues and evictions and so on. So then I said, okay, we won't go alone again because we're always talking to parliamentarians. We're taking the very people who are impacted to Parliament so they can tell their own stories. We go there, we hear these sad stories that we were hearing every day about life on farms, the harm that people lived under, the humiliation they live with on a day-to-day basis, the humiliation of living in that kind of poverty, the humiliation of having to grow food, to pick food, and not being able to eat the very food that you grow, that farm workers have the highest rates of malnutrition in this country. Their children have the highest rates of stunting. And these are the people who grow our food. And then they live with the fear, constant fear of being evicted from homes they've occupied their whole lives. So we get these really heart-wrenching stories. And it's like parliamentarians like sitting there in tears, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like, oh, what can we do? And I'm like, you're the government. You're literally the people who have the power to do something. Even if it's just to enforce the laws that you've passed, which they weren't doing. So you don't have a state that's committed to dealing with the systemic problems. So then in comes civil society. Okay, so what is the role of civil society? The role of civil society is to disrupt, disrupt the malfunctioning systems that we live with. In some ways, it's kind of quiet disruption, just providing the legal services that pro bono does. That's in a sense a disruption of the malfunctioning system. In other ways, it's bigger. It's challenging the force of the state. Is what we see, protests every day, blocking roads, and using new technology which I don't think we talk enough about in South Africa, how technology is being used, should be used more to help people access good information, quality information, to help and to spur the disruption of malfunctioning systems of justice and access to justice. Sorry, I went over.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And I mean, she's speaking from her own experience, yeah? Working with these issues on a day-to-day basis. I do want us to come back a little bit to the, how law has been commodified. Because I think law has been commodified. I mean, you did say that every minute you spend with, a lawyer is a cost, in your pocket. What does that mean for ordinary people? And outside of pro bono, and I mean, I know you're doing great work, but there's a lot of cases out there that go, without any recourse because people just cannot afford legal representation. And I think I also want to explore why we need legal representation in law is because the law is so complex, It's very complex. We almost need a mediator, we need an expert to help us, And part of that, the reason why the law is so complex is because it's completely divorced, it's completely displaced from our reality and what we know and how we live. And the whole concept of, it being Roman Dutch law suggests to me that it was developed somewhere and that template was brought and imposed on us. And which is why when we talk about common law, for instance, in the UK, it doesn't even have to be written down, yeah? Because everybody understands it's like a code of conduct. But in our case, our law is not really a code of conduct that is intuitively understood by everybody. It's almost something you need to learn, something from outside that's brought in that you need to learn. Dr. Moyo, I want us to explore a little bit, and I know this is your first 5 minutes, but I want us to explore a little bit this issue of the law and justice and this displacement that I've just spoken about, what the law means to us, and whether there is even an understanding or appreciation of the law, especially as we look at the level of non-compliance. Teresa spoke about enforcement. It's very difficult to enforce laws in South Africa, not because we have a weak and incapable state, but also because the citizens themselves don't identify with some of those laws, And so, do you want to, your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and you will excuse me right up front, I'm not very good at complying. So let me tell you what, I feel totally confused actually. I'm confused not from a negative perspective, but I'm a scientist. And when I look for an answer to something, I need to understand what the problem I'm trying to solve is. And I'm not sure that in this room, I don't know, I'm being presumptuous, but I suspect if I asked every person in this room, I'll get a different answer to what the problem we're trying to solve is. And I think that's a problem in itself. So unless we get clarity on what is this conversation about, we're going to walk out of here and we'll kind of have wasted our time. What is the problem? Have you watched debates in your parliament? When I say your parliament, I mean South African. Have you watched what goes on in parliament? And when you watch what goes on in parliament, what do you walk away feeling?
More confused.
Do you think that the parliamentarians know what they're doing?
No.
So, let me tell you why I asked this question. I think that we're not having a conversation about justice. We're not having a conversation about access to justice. We are having a conversation about the dysfunctionality of our institutions.
Yeah.
We have kind of zeroed in on a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And we're trying to move this piece, but we don't see what the total picture looks like, which means we cannot succeed.
We have to fail because of the way we've set about solving the problem. So if it's the dysfunctionality of our institutions, what is it that we ought to be doing? What should we be looking at? Lack of compliance, what does that take? People sitting in this room, we close the doors, we say we're going to make rules about how we're going to relate to each other. Now we've got a community. This is a community. And then, after we've agreed, we proceed to totally ignore every single rule that we agreed on. What does that tell you? It means we don't own them. So these are not our institutions. They are not, they cannot be, because otherwise we will be totally irrational people. We can't make rules and own them and then proceed to not to comply with them. So I think we need to try to go to basics. What is it that has gone wrong? What has gone wrong? If you go to a village in this country and anywhere on the continent, you find that the village actually works. The people who live in the village know the rules that apply amongst themselves and they comply with those rules. When there is a transgression, there is clarity what the punishment is, what the cost is going to be. It's all understood. When it comes to the nation state, we haven't even started. So I think the issue is, we have got things called countries that are notional. They don't exist. They actually don't exist. South Africa does not exist. Zimbabwe does not exist. It's just a name we've given to a certain geography, but in terms of the nation state defined through the people who live in that geography, we have not even started to build that community. And that is our problem. We don't own the geography, we don't own the neighborliness or citizenry, we don't share. I look at him, is he a fellow countryman? Or I don't think we now intuitively, as the French would feel, as the Brits would feel, as the Germans would feel, as the Americans would feel, we are not there yet. So we need to go back to basics and demand. And I like what Lebo was saying, because it's easy to say the politicians, but who are the politicians? They are us. They are supposed to be us, but we are letting them get away with becoming our bosses rather than our servants. Point number one. We let them get away with it. We treat them as if they are people to be worshipped and so on. They should be groveling to us. We pay them. We elected them, we pay them, but they turn around and become our bosses. If they understood that they are there to serve us, we would also be more inclined to ask them to account for what they do. What do they do? On whose behalf are they doing it? Is it with our agreement? Have we given them license to do these things? The answer is no, we've let them invent the relationship. If we reclaim that relationship, but also reclaim the responsibility, how many of you in this room feel that you can change the law? Put up your hand if you feel, intuitively you feel, I own the law, I've got a right to go and say, this does not work, let's change it. How many of you feel like that? The law has become bigger than you. Should it be like that? The answer is no. So the minute the law has become bigger than you, again there is a problem. You don't own it anymore. The law is supposed to be an instrument to serve us in the way we relate to each other. But we've inverted it. We've let it now have its own agency, not us. So what I'm saying is, I think we need to try and go back to basics to understand what our challenge is. The way we're having the conversation, we are pointing fingers at somebody else. We are not taking ownership. We're not taking agents like you were saying. We are saying somebody else is responsible for this. Somebody else is doing this. But the construct says those other people are there to serve us. They are there to take instruction from us. If we don't feel empowered to give them instruction, how are we going to even get started?
Thank you very much, Dr. Moyo. I think, the question that you raised about our parliamentary system and whether, how we feel about what's happening in Parliament. Those are the very lawmakers. And remember that, the institution of Parliament itself, that whole, is also quite foreign to us. So we've got lawmakers who are elected from amongst us, who go there, but in actual fact, the institution itself they're not properly capacitated to use the institution or the platform that they're given because they themselves don't understand it. And perhaps that's what you're saying about the institutions not belonging to us. Just coming back to you, Lebo, agency in communities, how do we, a colleague spoke earlier and said, we as community advice officers have been working, but even the communities that we work in seem to feel that we are part of the problem, because our communities themselves have also been sold and have bought into the law as it is constructed, right? And so when you come in and you are a paralegal and your history is in the liberation of this country, in the struggle, you are almost seen as a comrade, who is trying to cause problems, as opposed to somebody who is trying to help resolve some of the issues impacting our communities.
So, the problem with inequality is that it commodifies even things that should not be commodified. And I want to say this with all due respect. But you will also just forgive me if it's offensive, because I did not go to diplomacy school, so sometimes it fails me to put things nice. But how people become councillors, because in fact, you and I can be invited to a summit and we see the president and we say, oh, we know seats of power. But in fact, at a community level, government is your councillor, it's the people that are immediate, it's the police station, it's things that are immediate. Now, in an unequal society, when councillors go into council because of the money that they are going to earn, it's game over. And I think that is what Dr. Moyo is saying. It starts as game over. So what it does in a norm, in a community, and I see myself behaving that way, even with the many years in social justice, when I go into home affairs and I'm served well by somebody who gets paid, who's supposed to serve me well, I put it all over on social media. Oh my goodness, I was served so well, And that's what happens in inequality, So you're gonna pay somebody to queue for you, so it becomes the battle of who's got the money in the pocket. And similarly, the social compact we need, the activism that we grew in, where you participated, you were active, as we become NGOs and CBOs and stuff like that, is from getting one pot of resources to getting another pot of resources. So even if it made sense for us to collaborate, we're gonna slice this pie, even if it's one slice of a pizza, you're gonna pick up the tomato, I'm gonna pick up the cheese, and that happens because it's unsustainable that we can be so unequal as a society. It's setting up person against person. And I'm therefore not surprised when, community paralegals and whatever are viewed from that very same lens, And I think that is why, for me, I'm saying it's probably easier to point at government, but there's probably a need for us to point at what has become us as civil society organizations. And also, this is what I say, And again, you must remember, never went to any diplomacy school. There is a conversation even in our response that we must have about money. And where is the money that allows us, you and I, Bobby, to put food on our table first and foremost, because we work in these NGOs, but also to do our work. How much of it is it about disruption and transformation? You know, so I've worked many years in the HIV field. I was often very conflicted around where is the agenda for the HIV work set. I was even more conflicted when I go to AIDS conferences and the highlight speaker is Bill Gates. The last time I checked, he knew about computers and not medical science. But he gave a lot of money, so he got to the platform. You know, and I was like, no, people are clapping, it's looking a bit weird. But I'm gonna clap because my salary depends on Jesus forgive me.
Amen, Deborah. I won't allow you to go past that point. Evaristo, how do we move from here? You know, we've got the system, that's what we have. We've seen countries like Rwanda trying to take more control of their justice system. We've seen them explore going back to the people, like Prof. Pityana said, at the heart of our justice system should be the people. We've seen them do that with some success, yeah? When we go from here, how do we go and find that which was taken from us and bring it into, our present day, justice system?
I think it's time for us to begin to explore other forms of justice, and one that I can put on the table are traditional non-state justice systems. One of them is mediation, where communities sit and discuss the problem. One of them is something called restorative justice. You stole a goat, you were caught, therefore you must return 2 goats. They do not involve the state, because when we teach about the modern justice system, we use the theory of distant justice. That Roman Dutch law is distant. Not only is it in Johannesburg and Bloemfontein, in terms of the distance, it is also distance in terms of our mind. Because you don't understand the section 16 of the codification read with chapter 8 and subsection 1, paragraph 2, we don't know it. And to make it worse, there is a provision in the law that Boni alluded to, in every aspect of law, which says that ignorance of this law is no justification, it's not a defense. So the law exists somewhere, the onus is on you to know that law. So I have learned from Kenya, the Somali people in Kenya do it. I've learned from northern Uganda, the Acholi people do it. There is a system that is called Mado Apat, which is to drink the bitter leaf. It's a community-based justice system. It is also there among the indigenous peoples of Australia. It was there in Africa, because we had traditional Xhosa justice mechanisms. In other words, justice is a living institution. So even if apartheid colonialism made us forget and displaced our justice systems, we have the right to invent community-based justice systems. I like what happened in Bushbuck Ridge. They tried different political parties, it did not work for them. What did they do? They took the Bushbuck Ridge Ratepayers Association and they voted it into power. Why can't we do that if we are the people that are voting them? Why can't we vote ourselves there and put one of us there? And if this person does not do what we want, we change them and put them there. So traditional justice mechanisms that do not involve the state, where you do not go there as a witness when your goat has been stolen, but you go there as the one that has been wronged. But there's a lot of work that has to be done, like what happened in Rwanda with the gacaca system. They had to retrain people, they had to modernize it so that it can deal with large numbers of people. They had to sort of standardize it. But the bottom line is that the Rwandese people took the law back into their hands away from the French and Belgian legal systems that was used to oppress them. So the onus is upon us as communities to take the initiative. And then you come to Bongi, you say, Bongi, this is what we have decided to do as the people of Metsima Holo. We are tired of this magistrate court that is not solving us. Please help us do this. This is where we want to reach as communities. But again, the power is in your hands. Not only to vote out the people that are not acting in your best interest, but to take the initiative and start seeking the justice that you want. Water rights. There are people that are water poverty today, yet a pipeline passes through your village. There are people that are electricity poverty today because electricity must be priced at a prime. So these are the real issues. By the way, Bongi, you asked the question, what is justice? Justice is living a life. In fact, justice is having human rights. What is human rights? Living a life that is devoid of humiliation. Being born, living, and dying a life without humiliation. That is human rights. Not the first, the second, the third, and the right to uploading free data. No. Human rights is the right to rights.
But the whole concept of human rights is a UN construct. But you are saying we need to move away from that UN construct. I hear what you're saying. You've redefined human rights. Do you want to go for it, Dr. Ngo?
A bit of history. I'm not a historian, I'm a physicist, I'm a scientist, but a bit of history, because I think as long as we're talking institutions, we can disempower ourselves if we're not careful, if we focus too much on colonization. Because suppression is not always about colonization. Today in Africa, we're being suppressed by our own people. So there is a limit to which you should see this through the lens of colonization. So, bit of history. In the UK, going all the way back, what are called the landed gentry, people with assets, people with land, used to send their sons, specifically, not their daughters, to 3 professions: army, the public service, and the priesthood, pastoring, and so on. Okay? Those are the 3 things that a family with sons, if it had assets, would tend to send them to go and serve the community in theory, but in reality to protect its own interests. Yes. You understand? Yes. The reason why this history is important is because nothing has changed. Nothing has changed because people who are in power are the people who enact laws. They are the people who frame institutions. Why do they do that? To protect you and I? The answer is no. Always, if you look carefully, the people who enact laws to protect their interests. Yeah. The reason why revolutions happen, it's because when you've got alignment, so if we have got assets and we've got power, we'll make the laws to protect our assets. If a revolution happens, the new people in power often don't have anything to their name. They've got power but nothing else. Yeah. And by the way, the explanation I'm going to give you should also make you understand what is called corruption. And not my words, I said what is called corruption. Because is it really corruption? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Yeah, I really want you to be careful in terms of just picking these words up and saying it is corruption. When whites came to this part of the world, we were on the land. They were not on the land. They justified taking our assets away. After they'd taken our assets away, they instituted a legal framework to say, now this is mine, I've got title. Only after they'd taken it. After they'd taken it, they enacted laws to now protect their interests. So if I participate in a revolution and take power and I've got nothing, you think I'm going to continue to hold to laws that protect the other side's interests? Does that make sense?
No.
No, what I'm going to do, I'll suspend the framework of ownership. I'll acquire assets. After I've acquired assets, I'll then reinstate some framework of what ownership looks like. So understand this from a scientist. I'm totally unemotional about these things. I'm analytical. If you look at history, you'll find that what I'm telling you has been repeated time and time again. That's how the human animal is. We make rules to protect our interests, almost like retroactively. We suspend rules to facilitate for us to get our interests, acquire interests, and then we put a framework. So as you analyze our institutions, please understand this utility behind institutions. It's always to serve somebody's interests. Our own politicians today are doing exactly that. And that's why I'm saying, please look at colonization to learn from it as opposed to attributing all our problems to it. Because our current leaders have become our modern colonialists.
Yeah.
No, but they have.
Thank you. I mean, when you started, you kind of said, you know, you're a bit confused about where we're taking this. I am confused about what you've just said. Because essentially, you know, where you started, you said we need to own the agenda. We need to take the responsibility. But you're also saying, whenever there's a revolution, you know, there's this, you know, currency, you know, those without acquire forcefully, yeah? So it does sound like it's a never-ending cycle, and that even if we were, you know, to own the agenda, ultimately we would corrupt the agenda, you know, is what you're saying. Can I just go to Teresa? Teresa, I mean, I don't even want to ask you a question. I just want you to react to anything that's been said.
I think the waters are very muddy now. And so I'm not quite sure how there's so much going on in this discussion. And I just want to go back to what the premise of this panel was to take a look at the issues of access to justice in South Africa. And what we learn is that these issues, talking about these issues, becomes very complex, and it becomes about so much more than justice, than the system that we're faced with now. And a lot of it is political. And in some respect, we don't have direct control of the politics of it all the time. Certainly, next year is an important opportunity. Go to the polls. You try and be responsible with your vote, with all the knowledge that you have about corruption and other stuff. But the reality is that the politics of South Africa is not going to dramatically shift through the polls in the next generation. So either there's a catastrophic disruption in the social norms, in the peace and stability of South Africa, like we saw with the Arab Spring, where you have mass protests, and the outcome on the other side is not always going to be something better than what we live with now, right? So there could be a catastrophic disruption, which people become very hopeful that there's going to be positive change, and it might be something that's even worse than what we're faced with now. And perhaps I think it goes back to, and someone mentioned this notion of a social compact. Like, and even this idea of community, people in this room being a community and creating rules around how we will live and exist within this community, that would be a very difficult thing, because so many of us come from different backgrounds. I'm a lawyer, I tend to be too focused on rules and process. Someone else may be a pastor who believes in God, and I'm like, well, I don't necessarily. So I don't want to be governed by religious ideas that don't fit with the way that I live my life. Or maybe I'm not Christian, I'm Muslim, so that has another impact. So there's a whole range of things that divide and separate us, and then there's a complex exercise of how do we then create a social compact that we can all live with. And I think there was a philosopher last century, John Rawls, who created this notion of being behind a curtain, and then asking people to imagine, like, if you don't know who you are in society, like what place you're in, then how would you construct that society? So we put you behind a curtain of I think he called it the veil of ignorance. So you're behind this veil of ignorance, and you're going to step out into a society, and you don't know what your place will be. Maybe you'll be a farm worker, maybe you'll be a landed gentry. But so it's a gamble, then to create a society that would look like South Africa today, or look like the United States today. So in order to create a social compact, somehow we've got to have a starting point where we believe that those people who we think of as the least among us have a very basic right to live with dignity, to have the basic needs of life, shelter, food, education for their children, opportunities to advance within the system. If that very least amongst us doesn't have that, then we're all at risk, right? And we currently don't have systems, economic systems, justice systems, political systems that get us to that point. I think the South African Constitution tries and goes a long way toward that. But as you say, we have people who are in power who don't believe in that Constitution. They don't understand it. They make misstatements all the time. They don't even understand the laws that emanate from those rights. In the land sector, for years you had people say, well, it's a willing seller, willing buyer, we have to pay market price for land reform. It's not true. That's nowhere in the Constitution, and it's nowhere in the law. But somewhere people have this idea. So I don't know where we go. But I think, can I say one last thing?
Yeah, sure.
I think because the problems are so big and so complex, I think it's our responsibility to act within the spheres that we can act in, to make the changes within the spheres we can make change. We do have power to change the law. We can't do it on our own often. Civil society has been shifting the law since 1994. We've been clarifying those rights in the Constitution. We've been making law. We will continue to make law. We will continue to make demands, and we just have to keep getting more and more people, to be involved, to run for office, because it's so important to be involved in politics. So we need good people who enter into politics, who want to do good, not just to make money. So there's a lot
I can see a colleague is agitating. I will give you a chance to, for your closing remarks. I just want to take it back to our panelists. I mean, I've been asking questions. Even as Teresa was talking, I was thinking, but, the people in power were elected by us, not so? And until they're elected in power, they are one of us. And they behave like one of us, right? It's only when they're on the other side that things change. Yeah, so I don't know that we can just get away with saying we need to elect good people, because these were good people when we put them there. I just want to give a chance, for us to just add to the conversation, or maybe seek clarity, and if you don't agree with it, give us your own take on the issue. And I agree that we've kind of taken it, access to justice a little bit too broad, Teresa. And I understand your discomfort as a lawyer. In fact, I did think about whether we needed lawyers on this panel, but I felt that part of the problem we have is that we have experts, making decisions about our lives, and maybe we do need ordinary people, contributing to how justice is perceived and how the law is formed and implemented. Yes, please go ahead. Please just tell us your name before you say anything, and then your contribution. Just try and keep it short, eh?
My name is Izolta Butselezi. I'm from Justice to Justice. Sometimes we tell people that if you've committed crime and you need someone to defend you, there is a defense attorney in courts who will help you. If people go to courts, this question goes to the attorney. If a person goes to court and then the magistrates, or I don't know who, but asking, do you need an attorney? If a person look, oh, it's an Indian, no, he's a white. Say, no, I don't need an attorney. I can talk for myself. The language barrier is also prohibiting people from asking you to represent them. Thank you.
Yeah? If you've got a mic.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tiso Mahasa from Alpha. My pronouns are she and her. I want to say the panelists, they spoke of a lot of things that my colleagues and I have actually touched on. But what resonated with me a lot is we all know our rights, but people don't know the responsibilities that come with. And I believe as community-based officers, we now need to go let people know their responsibilities. As much as the 350 is not enough for anything, people are still going to have that attitude that at the end of the month or whenever, I am going to get that 350. So if I take whoever off that chair, it's going to be a problem. And I think it was Ms. Teresa, I'm sorry if your pronouns are not like that, but she also spoke of our beliefs are different. And if I'm not Christian and then a pastor comes and says, you are a woman, you should wear a dress, we're going to fight. So we also need to go back to the communities to make them understand that we need to modernize things for them to work properly. As Mr. Evaristo has said, that we need to find a way of taking how the olden days work and modernize it, and so that it accommodates everybody. Because at the end of the day, it does not help that we fight amongst ourselves and we hold such beautiful sentiments, but people are still not being helped back home. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thought-provoking presentation we have made today. My name is Sophie Malakwane from Ubuntu Legal Advice Center in the Free State. And colleagues, the topic, it is very deep. And I'd just like to touch on the topic of the issue of class versus access to justice and race versus access to justice. I was listening to Prof. Jana earlier on and listening to the panelists also. Colleagues, working in the space of access to justice is not easy. I'm saying this because now you will find that in terms of class versus access to justice, the people who are well off are the people who are getting off so easily out of the justice system. But the people who do not have the means are the people who are suffering within the justice system. Let me make a practical example. We have been having the state capture commission that was happening since last year or the year before. And then the results came out. Up until this day, nothing has happened to those particular politicians where evidence was presented. Clear evidence that acts of corruption and criminality was committed. Now you find a street beggar who went into a ShopRite or Checkers, who stole a loaf of bread, and that particular person was charged immediately. He slept in jail for the entire weekend. Yes. So where is justice there?
Right.
Thank you very much. Although I was not done, but it's fine.
I think, colleagues are speaking about a fair justice system. We don't have a lot of time, so I would like, please, pick any question or comment you want to respond to and follow it up with your own closing remarks. I see Teresa's got the mic, so maybe we can start with you.
Okay, thanks. I think I said in my remarks that access to justice does depend on your race, your class, the amount of money you have, geography, where you live, So, and the language you speak. So in theory, if you're in a magistrate's court and you don't speak English or you don't speak Afrikaans, there should be a translator in the court to translate for you to open those doors to access, but that doesn't happen. So there's so many rules that we put into place that don't get followed. And so often, because those rules don't get followed, sometimes we think, okay, then the system has to be totally dismantled. And the questions we have to ask ourselves is this system a wrong system? Yeah, it's not perfect. Is there a way we can improve it, or does it have to be totally dismantled? I don't have the answers to that. I think, when you talk about and think about colonialism and this system of Roman Dutch law coming from the outside, maybe it's not right. People often talk about, is democracy right for Africa? Is this Roman Dutch law system right for Africa? But we have so many people who, have built their lives around it, organized our lives around these systemic things that are in place. So, also thinking about what are the implications of dismantling it, and what are the tools? Audre Lorde wrote that the tools of the master will not dismantle the master's house. So you're not going to use law to dramatically shift the system of law that we have. It can be improved, but if we say that those kind of tinkerings with it to try and improve it are not enough, then we do have to ask ourselves the hard question of what will be put into place. It's all well and good to say, well, community structures, community courts, but there's also a range of potential problems. People who are different, who don't fit in, don't get justice in community courts. If you're LGBTQI, you're not going to get necessarily just, often women don't get justice. So then again, the justice that's delivered in those types of courts, those types of tribunals will be based on luck. You may be lucky enough to be in a community where you've got open-minded people who are the leaders who say, okay, everybody is welcome and should be included, and everyone should have an equal access to this tribunal and the justice that comes out of it. But you may be unlucky. So what do we put into place to protect the people who are unlucky? It's going to start to look surprisingly similar to what we have now. So we go back to what is our social construct, our social, agreement, what binds us together, and how can we start with what binds us together, what we can agree on, the basics that we can agree on, and how can we grow from there.
Right. Evaristo, Teresa says you can't use the tools of the master to dismantle the master's house. Yeah?
I think she was reading my work because I've got a chapter with exactly that same title. Maybe it's coincidence, but I believe that we can benefit from the master's tool, like English. Nguki Wathiongo said, we should not throw away the colonizer's language. Let's use it to our own advantage. But a more practical solution. Silo Soli from the Free State spoke about the intersection between race, class, and the issue of access to justice, and asked the question, where is justice? As a teacher, I pose this question to my students. What do you want to change in society? Yesterday, I was sitting in what is called the Higher Degrees Committee in the Higher Degrees Committee, that is where we adjudicate on students' proposals to do their PhDs. A South African woman, I will mention the nationality because it is important for this, wrote a proposal to do a PhD in political science. The title was The Dress Code of American First Ladies Since the Time of Abraham Lincoln. So the research findings will be that Michelle Obama wore a petticoat, that the wife of George Bush or Pierre Cardin. And then I said to her, what are the 4 biggest problems facing South African women? Unemployment, poverty, inequality, and GBV. So what do we have to do with what American first ladies are? How is that our problem? So I said to my first year students, I want you to go back to your community, identify a community problem,
and write an essay on how that should be solved. You have got children that are studying law. Why don't you ask them to start the process of law formulating from the ground going up as part of their education systems? My grandmother said to me, "What are you studying at university?" When I was doing my PhD. I said to her, "I'm studying the trajectory of liberation movements." She said, "What is that?" I could not translate it to her. Then she said, "Now, if you can't tell me what you are studying in South Africa, is it necessary?"
Was it necessary, Evaristo? Dr. Moyo, your parting shots.
Well, I suppose my closing observation would be it depends on what we think is possible. And I think often we sadly set out to form institutions on the basis of a misguided notion that whatever it is we're trying to do is possible. So I'm going to disabuse you that sometimes, you know, a lot of the people sitting over here, I'm not one of them. I'm in the rights movement and so on, okay? I'm not. And part of the reason I'm not is because I don't think a lot of notions that are embedded in the fight in rights are possible. I don't think a lot of it is attainable. And I think we mislead ourselves if we think that equality is ever going to happen. I don't think it's natural. And when I say natural, I don't limit it to human beings only. I look at nature in a holistic way. I try to understand the dynamics of natural forces and how it works. And my observation is that the rest of nature shows us that there are always going to be differentials, for whatever reason. That's why we get rain, for instance. Rain only happens because there are temperature differences which lead to convection, which lead to rainfall happening. You will never be able to stop it. The Chinese and the Russians set off on some notion where they thought that societies could be equalized. They've come all the way around to realize that it's not possible. Convection also happens in society, human beings, in other words. So I think this comes to a bit something you mentioned. When we try to make the conditions of other human beings better or bearable, it's not because we are necessarily being benevolent. We are stopping them attacking us by raising their temperature or lowering their temperature below rebellion point. You understand? It's like an insurance policy. So if, in fact, there is a philosopher whose name I can't remember because you quoted Rawls, there's another, who said a lot of the arrangements we make in human beings to make each other's conditions more bearable, it's simply to stop the temperature reaching rebellion point. It's preventive. So, yes, so if you understand that, you then put all these things in perspective. Thank you.
What is the rights agenda about? What is the rights agenda about? I mean,
I think it's above my pay grade. What I talk about. I want to. There's a point that I want to make in closing, and that is, I hope that in this conversation about access to justice, we really also hone in the role of capital, and whether or not a lot of the things that we are doing are possible in a capitalist society. And I think the commodification of the law, access to the law, issues of inequality have been raised. But I also think that there is another insidious way in which capitalism and media collude to create a very ahistoric society. And I think part of the problem, and this thought I think is important as we think about these things, is what I call the ahistoricism of the dominant narrative right now. And that is the belief, and I will set aside what Dr. Moyo just said right now, that in fact, because we've got a constitution, we've got rights, and we almost even are getting to a point where we may get to a point where, and some people have, that it seems as if apartheid was a figment of our imagination, and it's not a broken society. So again, when you look particularly at social media, you get these things. I'm still talking about the same thing, you know? And I think for me, why I say that is that it is very deliberate, because in fact, transformation must question powers that are propped up by capitalism. And it excludes the poor, it excludes women, you know, and I think unfortunately, what has happened even with our ruling party is that right now is about, let me be there so that I get myself a seat at the table of where the monies are decided. That's all that it has become. And for some of us who consume social media, I mean, each time I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and other things, I'm simply saying there is another form of violence, and that's what I call ahistoricism, that happens there, where the world there is unlike the world that I that I inhabit. And no matter how fractured our systems are, and they need improvement, and we need to improve them, I do think that if we used them and we were vigilant about them, because they were not created for free. So we can have an intellectual conversation, you know, and it's stimulating, it's interesting about, do they work, don't they work, are they the right ones? But quite honestly, the systems that we were trying to build, the society we were trying to build post-94, is very different from the society that we lived under before 1994. So the aspiration of that society, for me, still holds water. But sometimes the things that compromise it, you know, are things that I think we also need to talk about, the role of capital. That has also gotten into our politics. I mean, even the question of why don't we replace them and get in. I was speaking to people who started Rise Mzansi. It's a new formation right now. Promising young people, you know, you watch it and you say, yeah, these are the people. But the amount of money to participate in politics in South Africa, you must go find a blesser somewhere to give you the money, to go door to door and do all of those things. They were saying at that time, you will need about probably 10 million in order to get 4% of the vote. So in fact, none of us can contest the election. So the role of capital in reshaping a narrative, I mean, people in Cape Town are saying, no, just have us as our own country. You know, that ANC is messing up. And I look at them and I'm like, what do you mean? You know, because, you know, where capital is and where people are, they can afford to be ahistorical. They can afford to drive an ahistorical agenda. But more importantly, I think we are not talking about equality, but equity. And I think in another forum we can talk about what is the difference and how we've got, I want to believe, a moral, social duty to pursue equity, irregardless, as young people say, irregardless of the flaws in the system. Thank you.
Regardless of whether you say irregardless.
I think irregardless is stronger than regardless. I just like it.
Colleagues, I want us to end it there. But before I do, I just want to thank our panelists for the stimulating conversation. I think it was a bit too open-ended and perhaps the moderator failed to bring it back home a little bit firmly. But I think it sparks a lot of other conversations that we need to be having. I think this is certainly a platform where we've ventilated issues. I don't think we've got to the foundation, but we've certainly ventilated quite a lot of them. And I think there's a need for some follow-up and more, tighter conversation. But thank you very much for accepting the invite from Hlanganisa and sparing your time to be with us this morning. And thank you, colleagues, for listening. And before we end and break for lunch, I just want us to end with something lighter, just to take away the pressure that's been built up by our colleagues. Please, the floor is yours.
By the way, can I just
So I want to talk about justice from the perspective of a healthcare practitioner who's also a writer. So as a clinician, it's very easy to refer to people by their hospital numbers or their bed numbers, but as a person, as a patient, as a writer, as someone who's not on that side, you have to see the humanity of people. And I mean, when we talk about healthcare, there's so many ways that you can, when you think about justice in the context of healthcare, you can think about the management of fetal remains within our hospitals, obstetric violence within our hospitals, just generally the state of our public healthcare system. And for me, as a clinician, it was very difficult to write about what I saw in the hospital. But when I started to read news stories about what was going on in our hospitals, it became a lot easier to contextualize what I had seen. So my current series of poems is based on health-related news stories in South Africa. And one story that caught my attention was about the deaths of newborn babies as a result of carbapenem-resistant enterobacteria, which is a type of drug-resistant bacterial infection. And this poem is titled Blue for Boy. Name given, umbilical cord ligated, ink drying on baby's birth certificate, first cry pending, APGAR score 1, baby not breathing normally, panic, news from neonatal intensive care unit, skin color blue, muscle tone low, reflexes absent, effort at respiration none, panic. Nurse contacts the only specialist on call. No response from the pediatrics department. Baby still blue after nasal prong oxygen. Poor outcome predicted. Panic. Where is the doctor on call? Can someone give the wailing mother something, a meal, a sedative, an explanation, anything? Say to her, there's nothing we could do for your boy. Baby still blue, baby still, baby blue, baby still as a doll. Differential diagnosis, drug-resistant bacterial infection. Mother given the news. You'll have another one. Don't worry. Another story that caught my attention, and I think a lot of us are familiar with this, is about the treatment of mentally ill patients. And there is a story that a lot of us know where patients who are mental health care users within our country were mistreated while being transported from one healthcare facility to another. And this poem is called Regression, and it's about how even as healthcare practitioners, we do not give mentally ill patients the dignity that they deserve. Step 1. When she steals her caregiver's ring and pawns it for a fix, you must say, this is not how a testimonial is supposed to read for an outpatient. And her disinhibition and inappropriate smiling are not good signs. Let's book her in for observation. Step 2. When she threatens her mother, you must say, this is not how family feedback is supposed to read for a patient getting weekend leave, and her disinhibition and inappropriate smiling are not good signs. Let's take away her privileges, put her in Ward 6. Step 3, when she stabs a nurse, you must say, this is not how a progress report is supposed to read for a patient wanting to remain in an open ward, and her disinhibition and inappropriate smiling are not good signs. Let's put her in a closed ward. Step 4, when she develops insomnia and anxiety, you must say, this is why we have drugs. Serenades is to serenade her to sleep at night. Disipal is to make her worries disappear during the day. Step 5, when a colleague sees your patient and remarks on their trembling, their pill-rolling tremor, their teeth grinding, their tears, you must say, last resort, let's give her clozapine, or refer her for counseling with the pastors. Besides, the prophets said that there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth, but not like this. Not like this.
Close now. I'm going to ask Cheza to come up front and to do the closing remarks. And then we can break for lunch. As Cheza comes, so we're going to be placing, and when you use your phone and then you open your picture settings, you'll scan the QR code. It's going to give you a facial thing. So what we're trying to do as Hlanganisa is we're trying to get all of your faces. So then all those pictures are going to come to a back-end portal, and then we're going to create a collage of all our pictures. Smart, man? Yeah. So by virtue of you doing that, you are, you are consenting for us to have your pictures. Thank you very much. Cheta?
I'm trying to gauge my own temperature and see where I'm at. I think a lot has happened since morning. But I think the biggest thing for me is the power of conversation, the power of being seen, having a voice. Nkateko talked about, Black womanhood, the experience of Black womanhood. And when I look in this room, I see you. Hlanganisa sees you. And that's why we are having a conversation like we are having today. There's a lot of difficult work that we often talk about from a theoretical perspective. And what I love about today is that the people that are interfacing with Day 17 are here. From Bulwa to Mpopomeni, from Betuli to the Weststop, to Smithfield, to Wesselsbron, Bushbuck Ridge, Khamatlala, Manghwen, they are here. And I just want to say, as we close, that we see you, we acknowledge the work that you're doing. And even as we are convening today, it's a way of recognizing the importance of the work that you're doing in your different communities. And so that's the first thank you that I would like to say. Thank you. Thank you for the insightful conversation around decolonization. Dr. Becky, thank you so much for your disruptive approach. I think we need that disruption in the work that we do. I think one of the interesting things that I often think about is the kind of work that community-based paralegals do. It's unlike the law where you say, okay, step 1, step 2, this is the crime, this is the recourse. or this is the punitive measures. There's a variety of stuff that they have to deal with. And in one research that we did a couple of years ago, some of the issues that community-based paralegals had to deal with is witchcraft. Where do you even start? And so I think there's value in that kind of disruption in the way that we think about social justice and accessing justice. Teresa, thank you so much for your input. You know, around, sometimes we often think about things from a lived experience, but I think there's value in having that, a legal mind in the room, because we are forced to interface with the law. And so the value of the work that you're doing and your insights have been, you know, very valuable to today's conversation. Lebu, thank you so much. I think now that the panel discussion is over, you are back with to your normal hat. You are back to being our board chair. It's such, you know, we're so humbled to have your support as the chair of our board. You've played quite a critical role to get into where we are today. And I think many of you are seeing all our branding that says Hlanganisa Community Fund for Social and Gender Justice. And I must say it's really important who is in your board. And I think some of our colleagues from KZN, you'll know that one of the things that we say is that don't hire friends, family, and fools as your board, as board members. Because, you know, sometimes the support that we often need as organizations, you don't get from your board members. So it's such a privilege when you have the support. Judy, the ACF team, Senolo, but I think most importantly, the leadership of our CEO, who's really given the vision that we are running with. Thank you so much, Bonnie, and for moderating the panel. Kativo, just beautiful. Piercingly beautiful. Day 17 will remain with me for a very long time. Thank you. Bongani, the program director with the mostest. Wasn't he amazing? Thank you so much, Bongani. Thank you for driving the process today. Thank you so much. And lastly, colleagues, I just want to invite you to our award ceremony that we'll be hosting after lunch to recognize some of the beautiful work that has been going on in the communities that we work with. From 4 provinces in South Africa, there's beautiful work that has been going on, and you'll hear all about it after lunch. So at 2 o'clock, we'll be in the ballroom hall. I think that's what they call it. It's just on the other side. Yeah, so I think with that, thank you so much, everyone. I think I didn't stand too long between you and lunch. Thank you.
Enjoy the lunch.